Welcome back to the Preacher Boys podcast. Today, I'm interviewing an atheist who also happens to love religion. Jared Smith is one of my favorite YouTube creators right now. He's a one-man metal band and the mind behind the hit series Atheist Church Audit.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to another thrilling episode of Atheist Mother Dang Church Audit,
where he visits churches and religious communities, usually without any prior research or digging deep into the church itself, so he can experience it like a newcomer. On his channel, he's covered groups like
the Latter-day Saints, LDS,
and
the United House of Prayer for All People of the Church on the Rock of the Apostolic Faith,
and even
the Latin Mass.
And the refreshing part is his brand isn't the stereotypical terminally online atheist who's looking to win every single theological debate known to man, or making 2.5-hour mega rants online about Ray Comfort being the banana man.
Behold, the atheist's nightmare. You'll find the maker of the banana, Almighty God, has made it with a non-slip surface. So God has placed a tab at the top. When you pull the tab, the contents don't squirt in your face.
Although, if he did make a video like that, I would probably watch it because knowing him, it would be super entertaining. The reality is that Jared doesn't avoid using snarky humor that's often hilarious when he's talking about some of these organizations.
Is this the Summer Olympics in Moscow under the Soviet Union in 1980? Because I sure do see a lot of red flags.
But one of the things I really appreciate about his content is that he also tries to remind people that the individuals in the pew are human beings. Even when we disagree with them, even when they're part of an organization that's incredibly harmful or toxic, these are real people with real reasons for where they are in their life. In this conversation, we dive into the religious upbringing that Jared had, how religion still impacts us to this day, and we talk about the ethics of being a content creator in this space and what it looks like to bring empathy to the person in the pew while also not accidentally doing too much positive PR for the organization that might be quite harmful. I had a really good time with this conversation, and I know you will as well. Before we get into it though, if you are someone who appreciates the work on the show and you will get early access to certain episodes, some exclusive behind the scenes content, and a bunch more, be sure to support the show over at patreon.com/preacherboys and get me just a little bit closer to that private jet.
He made that airplane so cheap for me, I couldn't help but buy it.
All right, let's go ahead and get into my conversation with Jared Smith. All right, Jared, welcome to the show.
Eric, thanks so much for having me, man.
It is not an exaggeration to say you're probably you're in my top list of YouTube creators at the moment, and so I'm really excited to have this conversation, and I'm hoping it drives a lot of my audience over to your channel because I think what you're doing is really refreshing. I think first and foremost, if you were to elevator pitch your channel to someone who's listening, and you were to say, "Hey, I'm Jared, and this is what I do on my channel," what would that pitch be?
Yeah, my normal elevator pitch is I say, hey, I'm Jared, and I'm an atheist, and I regularly go and investigate religious movements, sects, cults, and I do so usually trying to go in a little blind because I want to feel what it feels like to walk in as a novice rather than as an expert with a whole bunch of, biases and, preconceived notions. So I'm coming at it from that angle, and then I tend to normally not have quite as much spite for religion as a lot of my fellow atheists, and so I feel like it creates a funky angle at times.
Yeah, it's interesting, like how much atheist YouTube, to put in quotes, it has changed, I think, in the last couple of years. And I think you're seeing a lot more of that like bridge building happening, whether it's someone like Alex O'Connor, who's also up there in my top list of people that I'm watching all the time, especially if I have a long drive, like a 3-hour episode. I'm like, let's go, let's listen to this. But it's not this like, I think when you go back to like the 4 horsemen of like the new atheist, it's like debate and fight and like almost it was off-putting to me as a former fundamentalist because it was like, oh, it's just that, but the opposite direction. Like there's not a lot of conversation happening here. And I think now there's this swell of like, let's discuss this and see if we have any common ground. Why do you think that shift has happened? I know maybe you know from your own perspective why, but why do you think we're seeing that hit a couple different creators?
I think maybe the trajectory of society is the same as the individual. You know, you get really entrenched in a really stern and intense ideology, and then people slingshot or they yo-yo the pendulum swings too far to the other side. And then it takes a while for people to kind of mellow out and come to a balance. And I think that that's probably what happened with, kind of the Christian movement in America for many, many years. And it went unchecked. Right. And so when the atheists came on the scene, it was sort of like that was kind of a natural and maybe even a needed, equal and equivalent reaction to, fundamentalist Islam, the Catholic Church abuse scandal. All of those things seemed like it was going to be too difficult to have, kind of a soft-spoken, charitable response to it. It seemed like, no, it was bound to explode, and it exploded with Christopher Hitchens and Richard Dawkins.
There is a logical progression that goes from believing in faith, having faith that your God tells you to do something, and doing terrible deeds like suicide bombing, like flying planes into skyscrapers. The vast majority of people of faith don't do such terrible things. But those people who do terrible things do it believing that they are righteous and good, and they think that they're doing the will of their God. So they're not evil people. They're actually good people by their own lights. They believe they're doing good things. And that's why religion is evil, because it can make you do evil things, believing that they are good.
It's funny because when I was younger, those guys were like the antichrists to me, right? I mean, they were just the absolute scum of the earth, and they were the devils. And now, and even after I deconverted, I still held a lot of like vestigial spite for them. And it's kind of taken like years to kind of recontextualize them in their political movement that was happening at the time, like contextualize them in the milieu of their day. And now looking back, it's like, no, I kind of get it. And that's still not my flavor, but I can appreciate it a lot more. Kind of seeing the full scope of it.
Yeah. Well, it's like any minority voice that gets a chance at a microphone kind of starts with this what feels loud, but I think it also feels loud in contrast to the silence that preceded it. It's like, It's funny, again, growing up in like a fundamentalist context where it's like you have this persecution narrative about your movement that we're constantly being pushed down with this. And sure, our movement in mine specifically was very small, but like if you just go theist versus atheist, like theist is the majority position, up until very recently, like we've never had a president that's not one. So like it's like when you see Richard Dawkins get up and talk about it, it's like you're hearing the exasperation of like shouting into the void, I'm sure at times, which again, any disagreements I might have about specifics, like I understand that feeling, and I've certainly felt it doing this show. Going back to the beginning for you really quick, just to give some context, you grew up in the more charismatic kind of stripe of Christianity.
Yeah.
Your dad was a psychiatrist. Did that lead to interesting dinner table conversations, or were those two things kind of siloed?
I think they were siloed. It's so funny because people, whenever I tell them that my dad's a psychiatrist, they're quick to ask like, oh man, like was he, constantly psychoanalyzing you? Was it like being at the dinner table with Freud? And no, he was just a really good dad. It was awesome. He's the salt of the earth, man. He's the best person around. I think that kind of his ethos is maybe part and parcel of a larger type of Christian that I see. So, I mean, he, not to drag him into all this too much, but he's a full blown doctor, went through medical school, got a degree in biology. And in spite of that, he's still a young earth creationist as far as I know. And his temperament is not one that has really any patience for like the pseudoscience BS of the Kent Hovens and Ken Hams of the world. He kind of rolls his eyes at that. But for him, he's just kind of content with a little bit of cognitive dissonance there, it feels like. I understand how evolution works. I've written thesis papers on it, but the Bible says that it's 6,000 years old, and I'm just going to trust in the mystery of that. And yeah, there's a part of that I respect them and am okay with. When theologians appeal to mystery, it's usually a good thing.
Yeah.
If I could make such a broad and sweeping statement.
Yeah. Do you find you respect that more or less than, or in different ways than the people who, are the apologists who do try, like, I think there's some goofy examples, and I'm
Yeah.
not going to do the typical, like, let me interview an atheist and then ask about like the Ray Comfort Banana Man, and now, it's like, I'm not going to go down that route. But like, you look at people like Wesley Huff, who was just on Joe Rogan, and he's making the rounds on all these different podcasts.
As a historian, I do think it is a historical question. You have a guy who objectively lived, he objectively died, and then individuals close to his inner circle claim that they see him not dead.
Right.
Again.
This is a highly unusual activity.
Highly unusual.
Right.
And is a very smart guy. Like Alex O'Connor's kind of picked apart his videos and gone back and forth. So I've watched probably more of Wes Huff on Alex O'Connor's channel than I have of Wes Huff on Wes Huff's channel.
Sure.
But you see a guy like that, and like, he's clearly not doing the pure, oh, it's all mystery. It's like, no, historically, you can go to this, you can go to that. And like, he sounds very intelligent with a lot of his analysis, and he's very well researched. Do you put him in a different category than someone who just goes like, God's a big God, there's a mystery there? Like, do you have more or less respect for one type of viewing it than the other? Like, how do you approach that?
Yeah. I mean, I think at a certain point it comes down to the individual level. Because it's all varying degrees of like, how much expertise does this person actually have? And I mean, Wes Huff, he's in the middle of getting his PhD. Like, he's going to have things to contribute to that field, whether he's an apologist or not. So there's that. Yeah. I don't know. I think a lot of it comes down to me. Maybe it comes down to tone a lot of time. It comes down to tone. It comes down to vibe. It comes down to, how assertive and confident they are. How often they are to overstretch their case. But to me, at a certain point, so long as they're not being flagrantly dishonest, it almost seems like I'm willing to make a concession. Like, yeah, you're allowed to have your belief and try to defend it rationally. Because to some extent I see that as kind of a psychological need. And, when somebody is fabricating evidence, when somebody is lying, or when somebody is using it to bludgeon people over the head with, a really crappy dogma or ideology, that's when I take issue with it. Whether it's, diving into kind of fringe territory of biblical scholarship, I mean, there's other players in that field as well.
Right. Yeah. I want to pull on that thread really quick. I'm curious, like, as you're navigating the things that you are in your content, where you're visiting churches, which I want to dive deep into in a minute, or you're reading through religious texts or books inspired by religious texts, do you have criteria that you go through in your mind to kind of weigh out whether or not someone believes what they're saying versus is just saying what they need to say? Because like, I wrestle with this all the time, where I look at like, there's the guys where it's clear, right? Like a sex scandal where it's like the guy clearly amassed power to himself to have access to this, clear as day. And then you have the guys that like went to those guys' Bible colleges and kind of do the same stuff, but you don't know if it's because they're a true believer in what they were taught, or if they're doing the same thing. And it can be hard to know like how much credibility to give them out of the gate versus like attack and pick apart on something they're saying.
It's damn hard. And that's probably the thing I lose the most sleep over, is, just toiling over that. Yeah. Do you remember, what's his name? Robert Tilton.
Oh, he wrote, was he the guy that wrote The Late Great, or no, that's Hal Lindsey. Hal Lindsey.
No, Robert Tilton was the farting preacher. If you've seen like those YouTube videos,
Okay, no, but now I have something to go down a rabbit hole about.
He was the most notorious televangelist of the 80s, I believe.
He was the prosperity, like send in this and I'll send you this. And yeah, I've seen a lot of clips of this guy. Never heard of him described as the farting preacher, but
there was a famous viral YouTube video of him, acting like, he's super earnest and praying in tongues. And then somebody just went in and added a whole bunch of like fart sound effects at the perfect moment. And
beautiful.
It's classic YouTube poop.
But learning how to release your faith.
He got taken down brutally. I mean, like there was a, NBC or Dateline piece all about him, just ripping him to shreds. I mean, it was so clear that this man was a grifter. He's still active. I watched his live stream the other day. He's got like 500 subscribers and he is still begging for money on the internet. He is still begging people to send him checks for thousands of dollars.
I'm not ashamed of the prosperity gospel of Jesus Christ. Today, I'm going to be talking to you from the Word of God about the rich life that's in Christ, the joy of the Lord.
How is it possible that somebody who has been so thoroughly debunked is just on this hamster wheel, incapable of doing anything else? And the thing that's so unnerving about it to me is the rapidness with which he reaches towards scripture. And it doesn't seem like, if you were just a God-hating atheist and you wanted to like make a grift about this, you could memorize the top, 5 relevant passages about prosperity and just repeat them over and over again. But it seems like he knows it. It seems like he's read the text a lot.
Yeah.
And that's maybe one of the scarier things to me, is not to imagine that he's a grifter, but to imagine that he actually believes it.
Yeah.
That's terrifying to me.
Right.
And I think the thing that's scariest to me with all of this, it's not our capacity to deceive, it's our capacity to deceive ourselves.
Yeah, I had a conversation with somebody recently who was like, being very critical of me not being a religious person like they claim to be. And I was pointing out some things that don't align with what they claim to believe. And, they kept saying certain things over and over again. And I said, the scary thing to me about this conversation is I don't know if you're trying to convince me or convince yourself, and that was the thing that I just kept, I was like, do you really believe this? Because your life doesn't reflect it. Maybe that's some fundamentalist bubbling up inside me. Or is it something where you just want me to believe that you are being consistent with what you think? And it's like that, trying to nail them down on that was like very disconcerting, because it's like, I don't know which of these things is true. And I don't know how to have a conversation with you until I know that. Like, because I can address that. I just need to know what side of the field you're kind of playing from.
Yeah.
That's not a question. I like to leave a statement and then go, here's silence. Fill that with something. Can I get an amen? Please clap.
Amen. Preach it.
I'm just going to cut you saying amen to everything I say and just cut all the rest of your responses. It's just a super cut of just.
Send it.
Agreed.
If you chop up my vocal samples enough, you could probably get me speaking in tongues.
Yeah, that's fair enough.
A little third of a second increment of every single one of my words in this.
With how unintelligible I am in some of my points, it already sounds like that. So you don't even have to worry with it. You ever edit yourself and you're like, dear God, why did I take 10 minutes to say 30 seconds?
Dude,
anyway,
the story of my life.
I'm doing it now.
Oh,
I do want to ask this, and then I want to get into church audits, but I keep having all these little threads. I'm like, let's pull on that. One thing that I wrestle with a lot, and I've read I haven't read all of them, but I've read a good swath of cult books. I've read a lot of deprogramming stuff. I've read a lot of things about theology and psychology, and like I'm more well read than I think the average person on this topic because of the nature of what I do. And yet, as much as I understand why people stay in high control groups and how people get swindled by con artists and cult leaders, I often find myself faulting on the side of not being sympathetic to people who stay in some of these environments. And I think some of that's because I noticed as a teenager something was off. And so I look at guys that are 50 and go, what the hell? You've had a lot more time to figure this out. When you look at someone who follows someone, like a Kenneth Copeland still, or they follow people who've been exposed time and time again, at what point do you blame the congregant for still attending? Like, is there a point at which we go, if you're going to give your money to this guy, like, that's on you. Like, I don't know how much more to show you here. Like, how do you wrestle with that in your mind? Because, like, again, I know the right answer to the equation, but like sometimes your heart doesn't follow the oh yeah, it makes sense logically why they're there, but I'm just struggling to go like, come on, man. Like, I can't show you any more scandals. I can't show you any more evidence of why this is off.
My hunch is that the two of you probably needed different things from religion. And so the reason why he hasn't snapped out of it yet is because whatever psychological need that keeps him in it hasn't been resolved somewhere else. He hasn't found it somewhere else. And so, I've been meditating a lot recently on like, why do people join a high control group? Why do people, become spiritual to begin with? And it's not just one thing. It's not just, oh, I want my life to have meaning. It's not just, oh, I want there to be existential beauty in the universe. Sometimes it's that you want to feel important. You want to feel powerful. You want reliability and consistency and structure. Sometimes it's just you can't imagine things being otherwise. And so I think a huge part of what I do is trying to figure out like, what is, cut through the bullshit. What is really the reason why you're here to begin with? If you were to wake up tomorrow and realize that it was all bullshit, what would you do in the wake of that? And people's answers are really telling. And I think that, trying to better understand that, I think that that's my only hope in getting some of these people out of those cults, those denominations. It's not so much, pointing out the flaws and like why it's bullshit, because most people know that it's bullshit. Maybe not the people in it, but from the outside, it's like, guys, obviously this guy's not a prophet. Obviously this woman didn't hear the voice of God. Obviously this set of bullshit texts from, the 1830s is not scripture. Sorry, not picking on the Mormons. From the 1620s, there are not scriptures. And it can be frustrating from the outside. But then you kind of scratch below the surface at the individual level and realize, oh, this guy needs this to be real. Yeah. And until you solve for that, you're not going to get anyone out of it.
That really connects to something I've been working through myself a lot is, and I already know people are going to comment and say, quit talking, Eric. This is one of those episodes, but it's a conversation. So I'll talk.
You have my permission to talk.
If you don't like it, leave. Like there's my authoritarian. No, but it ties to something, and I want to get your take on this too. One of the things I've wrestled with, because you were born and raised in religion, right? Like you don't remember a time before it, at least.
I do remember a time before my conversion experience. I'll preface that and say like I did have a very categorical night of conversion. I was kind of a little hellion, little shit 12-year-old, and then as a 13-year-old, I was a very different human being.
Yeah.
So there's that, but religion was always in the home.
The context of it and believing like a theistic home and like that was there from the beginning. And so I'm curious to get your take on this, because one of the things that I've wrestled with lately is trying to figure out what's me versus what was programmed into me from before a time I even remember. And and so one of the things that you mentioned that's really interesting is like what you needed out of religion. Like, I think it's a different question for people that joined, because people join for like, oh, I have kids and I want my kids to have a place to go. And so now I'm going to go to church, and like, it doesn't matter if I don't agree with all the minutia, like my kid has somewhere to go every Sunday, okay, I understand that. For someone who grows up in it, you're told what things you need from religion. And so like for myself, so much of it was preparing for battle. It was this very militant, preparing for battle, good versus evil, right versus wrong. And I think that moment where I got what I was told was going to be coming, where it's like, you're going to have this moment, you have to take a stand for what's right, even if it's not popular. Like, for me, I felt that thing when it was like, okay, the church isn't what it said it was. There's a clear right and a clear wrong here. Like, I guess I have to stand up for what's right here. And I in a weird way, credit the church for putting that type of, whatever you want to call it, character, mindset in me. But it was also the very thing that like the people in it weren't really living by. So it's like a very weird thing mentally to go like, how much of like the Eric that's rallying for justice for survivors comes from the people doing the abuse who were preaching something that was the message was more powerful than the person, it's like, that's the stuff where I go like, who's Eric and what is the preaching I heard from the time I was born? Like, do you find yourself going like, okay, is this Jared, or is this like, oh man, I was raised I was raised in this way. Like I was raised to think a certain way and to dissect things and to like, where do you start? Where does religion end? And it's an interesting thing to grapple with. And I wanted to throw it out there, and if there's nothing there, I'll just skip it and just pretend it didn't happen.
No. I don't think I was a person before religion. Like in a very real way, it was like, how much personality do you have as a kid, right? Like, what's your personality? Like, my entire personality at the age of 12 was Dance Dance Revolution.
That's a sin. Let me tell you something from the fundamentalist perspective. Don't be doing
K-pop,
that. That was the first step toward atheism. I'll tell you that. The slippery slope.
Listening to Darude Sandstorm. Oh man, those slippery slope.
I got in trouble for listening to Weezer. Okay. So like, it's a different life.
Hey man, this talent like that, it'll lead you away from Jesus. No, but it's weird because like I am entirely a religious creature. I'm an atheist, but like my entire identity, even wrapped up, even as an atheist, is still wrapped up in Christianity. It's still wrapped up in the story of, Christendom and the church and theology and heaven and hell. Like, that is who I am. And I'm okay with that. I think that like, oh man, if you stripped away all that stuff, like, I don't know, I guess I like art and aesthetics and dark shit, but that kind of, shapes the raw clay of my, my religious core, rather than like existing as its own thing. Right.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's like, do you like that dark shit? Because it's like interesting.
I think that was neurological,
but it's also, the Bible's got some dark shit, like I look at myself and I go like, they preach against horror movies, but like they created a huge horror fan because all my favorite stories were these Old Testament, like, we're going to slaughter hundreds of people. Maybe I shouldn't say that was my favorite stories. That's a little crazy, but it was like, oh man, this guy got stabbed in the intestines, and like this dude's, they're taking hundreds of foreskins, and it's like, that's so cool, like he defeated an army with the jawbone of an ass. Like, let's go, like I'd love to see a good solid, we've got how many Passion of the Christ type movies. We need some Old Testament Tarantino style.
We don't have enough foreskin movies.
Right.
Come on.
Right. Let's
Quentin
kickstart a
Tarantino
project,
would be
actually.
Do what?
Have you seen the meme where it's I need my foreskins? It's the Brad Pitt and Inglourious Bastards.
No.
Someone made a meme of that, and they're like, if Tarantino directed like the Old Testament movies, I'd be there for it. We can talk more about kickstarting something. But anyway, this is a good segue. Not foreskins, but being an atheist who loves religion, which is such a part of your brand. Let's wander into the church audit side of things, because I have so many feelings when I watch your videos, which is probably a good thing. Like I'm sitting there thinking on so many layers about your content in terms of I love it. It's well put together. Your editor is amazing. And it's really well constructed. It's super entertaining, bingeable. But then I also go like, I don't know about this angle to it, or like, or I don't know if this part's beneficial. I know this part is. I wish I had thought of XYZ first. Like there's all those things that you think about. First and foremost, like what prompted you starting that? Because you've done a lot of different content. If you go back to your oldest videos on YouTube, like the church audit side is a little deep down the trail. Like what made you go like, okay, let's try this out? And was it for you, or was it like, this is a great segment idea, let's see what happens?
It's really funny. I mean, the history of it was like, when I was still a young Pentecostal, I started going to other religious places, places of worship, because I wanted to like better understand other denominations and other religions so that I could better preach Jesus to them, right? Listening is the platform that you stand on when you want to speak. And so it felt really important to better genuinely listen to these people. And so I went to a mosque when I was 19, got invited by a nice Muslim from Damascus. I wasn't invited, but I tried to go to a Nation of Islam mosque, was politely stood up at the door for some reason. And yeah, then fast forward several years and I'm deconverted, and I don't know, somebody said something to me the other day, like, sometimes it's just fun to poke the ashes and see if anything still burns. And so that's kind of what it feels like. And going to a lot of these churches is just like, was it all a fever dream? Did I really believe this stuff? Was I really this passionate zealot? Did any of that actually happen? And like, yeah. And so there's kind of an armchair sociologist in me that likes going and like, really trying to understand and analyze what the hell is going on with religion in America and at large. And just seeing and comparing and contrasting how people are doing it. So originally when I started the series, like I just did a couple of videos on Instagram, like, took to, made stories on Instagram stories and went to a couple of churches and did that. And then I made the first couple Atheist Church Audits, and I sent one to my best friend. And he's not the type to like, gas me up or anything. But he was just like, oh, I'd watch this. And I knew that it would catch on. It was just kind of like a done deal. Yeah. And now we're here.
Yeah. No, I thought about when I first started the show, I was like, it'd be, and I was obviously covering scandals, and I was like, it would be so great. There's no way to do it. Like it's logistically impossible. But I was like, it would be great to have like a Kitchen Nightmares style show, but for churches, where like a Gordon Ramsay character goes, what are you doing?
What is wrong with these people?
We don't have a limp-wristed something playing the piano.
Stupid. I mean, really.
And the quartet don't have on pink ties.
I'm gonna go ballistic. Get a grip!
Pink ties, what I meant to say.
But you have a very nuanced approach, and your goal is really to go into a church blind. You pick a church, you go in blind, and you just report back with what that service was like. First and foremost, let's address that. Why blind? Because I'm sure there's plenty of people that send you stuff and go, dude, you got to go to XYZ church because this, and this. Like, and that's kind of like the opposite of what you go for. Like, how do you pick churches, and why do you go in blind for that experience?
I mean, if I hear through the grapevine that like, hey, something funky is happening at this church, maybe that tips me off to like, hey, go to this one rather than the generic Methodist church down the street. But I think that it's just so much more interesting to, in real time, see the cognitive dissonance of somebody, going through all of the emotions that you feel when it's like, well, I heard this and this and that about this church, but then I went in person and it's like, but these people are so nice. There's no way these people are abusers. There's no way that these people are embezzling funds and hurting children. And having to actually grapple with that on the ground, I think is much more interesting. Because my goal isn't to do takedowns per se. But I want to experience it as a novice experiences it, right? Because there are people who join cults and high control groups and sects and fringe movements every day. And I kind of want to be able to get into their heads and see like, yeah, what was the appeal? What was the lure? Right? Because, I think that like, it's super easy for everyone on the internet to be like, we know the punchline. Like, what are you doing? Like, why are you giving these people the time of day? But it's because, the people who convert often, that's their experience. And I want to better understand that. And kind of then try to get a little bit more informed on, the ex-member stories and all of that. Yeah. And kind of hold them in tension and feel the cognitive dissonance of like, no, surely not these people, right? I think that's harder.
Right. Well, it's a good way to get to the why, like, again, it's almost like the Scientology thing where people go, well, that's insane. And like, how could you do that? And look at this person. And then I'm like, well, they're not even allowed to look up Scientology online. So like, it's a lot easier when you're reading the stuff that they will never see to go like, oh, I'm making an informed decision, which like, that's kind of the point, right? It's like, you can't really have the informed consent when all the details of the group are not laid out in front of you.
Right.
But I think on a much less serious level, I think when you go to like the local Mormon, temple, or you go to this local group, it's like, what are they getting on Sunday morning that they're carrying with them through the week? I think that's a really interesting way to go about it. And it's something like I personally, with my personality, wouldn't have done. I would have gone the Gordon Ramsay, like, what's going on in here? Which is why I never did it. Cause I was like, I don't want to be that guy that just goes and disrupts the service and like is a fool. This is the part though, where I sometimes I question when I'm watching your stuff, where I'm like, you do such a good job of creating empathy for the individual in the pew. Sometimes I go, is there a danger of unintentionally doing PR for a generally harmful group that, like, exactly the point, like, you wouldn't notice this on a Sunday morning. Like, you would go in and be like, oh, worship was good and the sermon seemed normal, but you don't know, like, oh, 6 months down the road when you're an intern and you're like, then it goes into whatever weird thing it gets into. Like, do you ever panic about that or like think about that? Like, where does that play into the content side of it?
I lose sleep over it. Yeah. Kind of two separate things, right? There's what's happening at the individual congregation. That's much harder to detect and get a feel for. And then there's the bigger thing, the bigger question of like, what's happening structurally with this denomination or this sect or this cult that is consistently producing these bad outcomes. So almost certainly I will go to a church eventually and review it and be like, yeah, I don't know, middle of the road, 3 out of 5 stars. And then find out, 2 months later, like actually, like there were several like really high profile abuse cases here by the pastor. And I made the mistake of saying, oh, well, he was, smiley and a nice guy. And then, find out that he wasn't. And yeah, it's hard with stuff like that. And it makes me anxious, but I think that that's kind of speaks to a broader question of like, how do you identify predators and perpetrators of evil just generally. And that's hard. So there's that thing. And I will 1,000% miss some of those cases and I will make the wrong judgment call. And I hope that people will, be gracious with me. there's that. Then there's the other side of it, which is, okay, no, there's a system at play here, which is consistently producing bad results. And sometimes you have bad actors in good systems, and then you have, good actors in bad systems. And I'm really interested in getting as granular as possible because I want to understand the play by play. Like, all right, there was a series of decisions that led up to this kid being abused, or this pastor having an ego the size of Mount Rushmore and sleeping with 20 of his secretaries. Like, how did that happen? Like, what were the individual decisions by the clergy, the elders, the deacons, the pastor himself, the parishioners? Like, what happened? So there's that. I think I'm also, in the instance of like some of these cults that I'm investigating, it's one thing to know on paper like what a cult believes. It's much more difficult to know how they believe it. So, like with the Jehovah's Witnesses, they believe that the end of the world is going to happen like any day now, right? And there's a lot of Christians who say that same thing, but not in the same way that Jehovah's Witnesses do. Like, they're
the closest I've seen you come to beefing with a religious group. Like, I feel like you have a major, like what your content is very different, I would say. Not different, but much more aggressive in contrast to your other content toward that group.
Probably the biggest criticism of my channel, and also the most valid criticism, is that I'm too soft on some of these groups. But that's kind of the point. That's the modus operandi that I'm willing to take, is because I want to go through the process of, being like, well, I don't know. Like, I've heard some crap, but I don't know. Is it overblown? Is it, salty ex-members? And then slowly coming to realize, oh no, there's a problem here. Oh no, this is really bad. And especially doing this across several different groups all at once, that process can take months, maybe years, for me to kind of come around and feel like I've, got a holistic understanding of this group. So when I go back and watch my like initial JW content, I cringe, I wince, because I'm like, I'm such a pansy. Like, I'm not calling it like I see it. I'm doing a good job of humanizing the people in the pews, but like it's an evil death cult. Not the people, but like the system itself. It is so malicious and volatile, and I hate it. And I want people to see that journey. I think it's important.
The example you just gave of like, it's the perfect example of the good people in a bad system. And I think that's the biggest struggle doing my show, is like, I think some people go to, like, in my context, the independent fundamental Baptist movement is a cult, and everybody in that movement is this, and this. And my gut response is just like, first of all, if you're listening to my show, you were likely in that. So you were one of them, and you weren't those things, and you ultimately left. And the fact that you're calling it a cult implies that there are innocent people inside of it who have been manipulated, brainwashed, coerced, controlled, whatever word you want to use to describe that. So why are they catching strays for what the organization is doing? Like, what's that accomplish? And I think, like, when I watch you talk about, like, say, the Jehovah's Witnesses, like, I walk away going, he's considering the person who is standing there next to a board with the Bible saying, I want to talk about the Bible with you, who are the sweetest, many times are some of the sweetest, most sincere people, the same way I've met so many Mormon missionaries who are the sweetest, most sincere people who are attached to this denomination that's like, ugh, like, I don't know what to do with this. And I think seeing, it doesn't really matter how I even perceive it. Like, I think if that person watched your content, they wouldn't go, hey, he hates me, this 19-year-old missionary riding my bike around Utah. Like, he's really pissed at the things that I'm maybe not seeing, or at something he perceives as a threat to me that maybe I don't agree with yet, that is, I don't think is bad. Like, to me, that's where I think you really beautifully are in this. Like, you're faulting on the side of empathy and compassion versus the side of like firebombing the entire region that you're talking about.
Yeah.
That's kind of how I look at it. But
I mean, so much of my modus operandi is based in how, I came out of Christianity, because I look at the new atheists who I used to have a lot of spite for. And I would say that they added several years to my Christianity, because I could always point to them as the detractors, and, they were a straw man of what unbelief looked like. And
the persecution kind of reaffirmed you're on the right path.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, I feel like when I'm able to see the good in people, and maybe even flatter them a little too much at times, I have a bad habit of doing that, admittedly. I feel like it gives me a little bit more rapport when I'm able to slowly come around to seeing the BS, because if you come in with a heavy hand, people turn it off. But when people see okay, he's not trying to just, come in with a bulldozer. But then those questions start to, they start to bubble to the surface, and they start to, gain shape, and that can take weeks or months, in the same way that a person's deconstruction does, right? It's a lot of little questions that kind of gain traction over time. And I just think that's more interesting.
Yeah.
It's more interesting, and it's more difficult than being like, I read the Wikipedia page, I know they're a cult, I know they're the bad guys. As far as, am I worried about it doing negative PR? I think I'm worried more so about on the individual church level. I could be like, hey, I went to the mega church down the road and had a decent enough time, and they were smiley and friendly. Go check it out. And I think I'm maybe worried about somebody doing that, or that church, feeling proud and excited, just for them to have a scandal that breaks, and then everyone's disappointed and upset. But I don't think that the average person who's watching my channel is very at risk of joining a high control group. I could be wrong. And I'm sure that there's exceptions. But I get emails every day from former Jehovah's Witnesses, former Mormons, former, people in all kinds of different cults. I haven't gotten any from people who, said, hey, you were nice enough to the JWs in your first meeting that I, went and joined the Kingdom Hall. Maybe they did, and they just didn't send me an email, but, yeah.
This whole building bridges and having credibility to have conversations on both sides, like to the point that you have like a Ruslan who's going, come to my conference for Christians, and you're an odd bedfellow for that. And, then you have like the atheist community, or people who are critical of a lot of religion that also appreciate your channel. Like, I'm curious, do you get more pushback from atheists who go, why are you interacting with the people who believe in the magical sky daddy? Or do you get more pushback from the Christians who go, you're painting everybody in a bad light, and you're propagating like this really negative view of religion potentially? Like, I'm assuming you get both of those, no matter how kind you try to be.
Yeah. It's interesting. I thought that I was going to get a lot more spite from the atheist community than I did. Maybe my channel just isn't big enough yet. I'm sure
get you there. Let's get you some spite.
I'm as famous as I want to be, man. No, I think that I think as the channel grows, that's going to be a consistent criticism. Will be, hey, you're too soft on religion, and you're potentially emboldening religious folk. I would challenge that on average. I'm sure that some people are going to be, they're going to watch my content and they're going to become more religious. And for a lot of those people, I think that's okay. And maybe that's even a good thing in some specific cases. For me, it's a question of what kind of religion are they joining? What kind of religious person are they becoming? And I hope that I can be a, useful critic from the outside, kind of inching them towards a direction that's, not incredibly harmful. So there's that. But then a lot of other people, and maybe it's 50-50, who will watch my content and realize, hey, you haven't talked about my cult yet. You haven't talked about the Moonies or the Scientologists yet, but I heard about all of these other cult tactics that you mentioned in this other group, and it started to seem eerily familiar to my own. And I decided to leave. And that excites me as well. Yeah. I mean, so, probably the bigger criticism that I get from Christians is like, it's not even a criticism. They just ask if I'm really an atheist. And then I have to, slowly let them down gently and be like, no, I really am. Yeah. I'm happy to spit on a Bible or something if that's, we'll prove it to you,
Yeah. Do they accept that offer or no? I just picture you walk around the conference just hawking loogies, it's probably not a good look. One of the things that's coming up as you're talking about this and talking about the different religions, like this example you gave, like, oh, you haven't talked about the Moonies, but hypothetically, I've heard other groups and I see the same thing happen. I think that might be the best benefit that comes from what you're doing is that, we talked about before we hit record, there's so many similarities with your background being charismatic and mine being this very stodgy fundamentalist background where like couldn't even have a guitar on stage, like very rigid environment where like we would have looked at you as going like, they're a false religion. They're way too liberal. They're going to hell at an extreme, like all this sort of stuff. You guys probably would have looked at us and went like, you're missing out on all the fruits of the spirit and all these things that you could be experiencing. But we were really the same, just in different fonts, like in the way that we approached the world and viewed our theology and viewed the importance of our faith. And I think one of the biggest things I see people do is they leave one group, and just like the person who leaves the next and then dates the same version of that person 5 or 6 times, they leave fundamentalist Christianity and go, Richard Dawkins is the man and I'm going to smash everybody. And they're doing reverse apologetics. And then they jump to the next person and they go, this person's the man and I'm going to join this group and we make fun of this group. And it's like, you're just like fundamentalist in different fonts. And I think like the more you can see how similar all this is, maybe you can start living differently than just cycling through the same mentality over and over again in different political, spiritual, whatever group that looks like. I think that could be a really huge benefit of just your type of documentation that you're doing.
There absolutely is that. Fascinating, like to acknowledge the similarities between these movements and how illuminating that can be for people. At the same time, there's also a huge lesson to be learned in the differences of these groups and, the wild kaleidoscope that is religiosity in America and abroad. But I think that I've been so fascinated by the disposition of a lot of ex-cult members recently, and specifically with regards to my investigation of the Christian Scientists, because I feel like I've heard a lot from other ex-cult members, especially like the ex-Jehovah's Witnesses, that they're kind of that there seems to be like a sense of like, come on, get to the point already, go for the jugular. But the reason why I can't do that as quickly with the Christian Scientists as I can the Jehovah's Witnesses is it's a very different religion. It's not a copy paste of another high control group. It's different. It's its own unique flavor with a very different kind of hierarchical structure. The mechanisms that keep people in the one faith are totally different than the other. Like in the Jehovah's Witnesses, it's very hierarchical. It's very, it's also very patriarchal, right? And it's just not in Christian Science. Like with the Jehovah's Witnesses, you have an oligarchy. You have the governing body, these, what is it, like 8 to 16, somewhere around there, dudes who just like control everything. They are, God's representatives, period. In other cults, you have, a cult of personality where it's not an oligarchy, it's just an authoritarian dictatorship. And then with Christian Scientists, it's like this totally other thing where it feels like a milieu of bad ideas and nobody's at the top. And so it's like the mechanisms that you use to get a person out of one cult isn't always the thing that you use to get them out of another. And I think it's too easy to miss that. And so, going in and kind of trying to see it with fresh eyes, gives you the ability to kind of like, no, I want to punch where it hurts eventually. And it'll take me a while to get there. But like, I can't go in thinking that every cult is the Jehovah's Witnesses. I can't go in thinking that every cult is, insane, charismatic Christianity. Acknowledging these groups on their own terms and really listening for what makes them tick. That's the only way that you're going to really get to these people.
Yeah. Especially when what they're about isn't what they necessarily say that's what they're about, like,
well, that's the funny thing is there are some groups and cults where the thing that makes them culty is sort of like tucked under the rug and, not talking about very much. The thing that's so like bizarre about Jehovah's Witnesses is all of the things that make them culty are just, it's like all they talk about. Like all of the worst parts of that religion are just the things they hammer on over and over and over again. Whereas like you go to some Pentecostal churches and it's like, oh, well, what makes a Pentecostal church a Pentecostal church? Well, the gifts of the Spirit, right? You have some Pentecostal churches where it's like, yeah, that's there, but they'll go through their entire year's worth of sermons and, maybe 5, 10, 20 deal with the fruits of the Spirit. Whereas like with the Jehovah's Witnesses, they just go through their Rolodex of shitty, awful ideas time after time. Oh, today's sermon is on how to excommunicate your friends and family. Oh, tomorrow's sermon is on how to not get blood transfusions. Oh, the sermon after that is how to ignore information from the outside and further isolate yourself into this incredibly tight-knit and cloistered community. And it's like that's all they know is to just talk about the things that make them really culty. With other groups, it's like, how many sermons in the IFB were actually about adult baptism? Like
yeah.
that. So it's funny thinking about it in terms like that.
Yeah, like how many were about the distinctives that like actually made them what they are versus like you'd hear much more about like authority. Like what's interesting is they were so vocal about like the patriarchal authoritarian kind of structure. Like that was such a big piece, but like it is just so different. I think there was like a bait and switch, and this is why I go back to the going in blind versus knowing a little bit about it is like, I look at ours and it was such a bait and switch of like, the gospel is a free gift for all. Come as you are. We're going to throw a vacation Bible school. Come in, walk the aisle, pray a prayer. You're in shorts and a t-shirt. That's all good. Like God loves you and he wants you. Just admit, believe, confess, and like Jesus is Lord. And here you are. And then you get baptized. And then maybe your haircut's not quite right. And then maybe your clothes aren't quite right, actually. And they were good to walk the altar, but like if you're going to commit, maybe join a ministry and maybe join 2 and 3 and maybe go to Bible college. And it's like this moving goalpost of holiness, just keeps going, where it's like, yeah, there was some really good things in the beginning there that then led to like, okay, you've been in it 20 years and you don't feel any closer to the thing that you were supposed to get close to in this ministry. And like, it's a really, again, it's what they present versus what it is. Like in reality, it's like, the whole IFB to me is like the sunk cost fallacy. It's like I've put in 20, 30, 40 years. I can't stop now. Like I'm so close to
Yeah.
hitting being the faithful man of God that I can be. But again, it's so hard. Like it looks so appealing when it's like, yeah, I am having a really hard life and they're offering me unconditional love and acceptance.
Yeah.
And you're not going to
Yeah.
realize they're not offering that till so far down the road.
Right. Right.
With all these in mind, I'm curious to ask you this question because you've been to a lot of churches now. Not talking conversion, like you can still be the same person you are right now. But if you were forced to attend a service in a certain religious group or denomination, you have to go every single Sunday or Saturday if it's Seventh-day Adventist. You have to go on their day and go to a service once a week. Which one would you choose and why?
Man.
Jehovah's Witness?
Oh yeah. You know,
I
if
know
I have
from
a
your
death
content,
wish,
it's not that.
if I ever just, yeah, if I ever just feel like going absolutely insane, maybe I would do it like as an art piece. Like I
Like
will say,
Clockwork Orange with just your eyes held open and
yeah,
you're just sitting in a meeting
that's
in a
kind of what it
kingdom
feels
hall
like.
somewhere. Yeah.
Yeah, I will say though that every time I go to a really boring church, it's when I feel the most inspired musically. Like just something about the monotony of wah, 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 wah. I just slowly hear the 8-string chugs in the background. It's like, and that's why in John 15:11, that's what my brain's doing the whole time. So it's kind of good for you to be that bored in a church service.
So
No,
maybe
but
an IFB church would be great for you.
maybe. Also, we'll have to talk about this later. I have not audited an IFB church yet.
Got to do it.
I need to. It's high on my list now. I think you've expedited that to maybe.
Well, don't
maybe one of
talk
the
to me
top
too
ones.
much because you're going to run out of churches to go in blind. So just pick one and we'll
I feel
walk through it.
That's fair. Ah, man. It would probably be a high church setting. I'm a sucker for aesthetics. I'm a sucker for good art.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's kind of obnoxious because a huge part of my audience is like Orthodox Christians because I've said some nice things about them. And I always have to be like, all right, calm down.
We'll get to you. We're going to get to your stuff soon.
It's, they're not perfect and there's,
sure.
Beef to be had. But man, it was the wildest thing. I was coming home from visiting my grandma in Pennsylvania and I was looking for a McDonald's and, I took the wrong turn on the interstate, just bumfuck middle of nowhere in Pennsylvania, took a wrong turn and got off the exit and it was like, shoot, I need to turn around. So the first parking lot that I turn into is this huge Orthodox cathedral. And I was like, oh, all right. And, I don't believe in providence, but I was like, all right, fine. Let's see where this goes. I go inside and I like snuck around everyone because I get recognized most in Orthodox churches. So was careful to not say hello to anyone. I snuck into the sanctuary and they have like this dome at the top of the church, which is pretty common. And I think it's called Christ Pantocrator is the name of the icon. And it's just, everything that I love about religion is usually like the existential nature of it, kind of this cosmic nature of it. And it was like, this breathtaking awe. And I've experienced it in other circles as well. Orthodox, don't get too excited. There's a mosque in Morocco. I think it's called Al Hassan II. It's the largest mosque in Africa. Mm-hmm. And it was that same thing where like you walk in there and you feel so small. Like you are just so breathtakingly small and trivial by comparison. Yeah. And that's the thing that I love. So it'd probably be a church or a mosque or a cathedral like that.
Yeah, I relate to a lot of that. I still am fascinated by like just religion, which is why we're having a conversation. I watch your channel, obviously. But I find myself, so since I've left fundamentalism, like I've been to a couple different churches, like a handful, like I've watched a lot online from people, and I don't feel like I got that and then left and then never, like, why didn't you ever try a Catholic church or whatever? It's like, but I, interestingly, the churches that turn me off the most are the kind of mega church contemporary Christian churches now. I've been to one within the last year or so, and I just was like it feels so performative. For those that are listening on the podcast, I just made I'm about to throw up a symbol. But I look at some of those and I'm just like, it's so obviously manipulative. It's so obviously, you're right. Like we were standing there, I left and I told my wife, and I was very frustrated. I was just like, what they're singing and the way that the team comes up when the pastor gets done preaching and the guitar starts to strum, and the lady who just did her shift at Chick-fil-A yesterday is up there and she's crying and her hands. I'm just like, this is doing nothing for me because I can't give myself over to this.
Yeah.
And what I can tend to like give myself over to is when I'm in, like, I've been to Serbia and been around these Orthodox churches that you talk about, where there are thousands. Like, we're not talking fundamentalism like, oh, this is like the faithful men from the 50s and 60s, their influence is still felt. Or the megachurch that goes back to, it's like, we're talking thousands of years of faith that has become this. There's something so beautiful of that in that, like, even if it's not theological, it's like just historical. It's like this building.
It feels like that scene from like the Avatar, like the Last Airbender, where he's like looking at all of the line of like avatars that came before him. Just like this never ending like succession. It's cool. And, even not believing in any of it, it's like, having a lineage like that taps into something deep in the human psyche.
Well, I think for me, like, if I were to be religious, if I were to attend religious services, like, it would probably be Orthodox or Catholic. And it's interesting. Like, Catholic has a lot of baggage to it connected to what I talk about.
I was about to say, it's ironic.
I would be a Catholic. That's a soundbite people will run with. But just in terms of like, the history associated with it is interesting. Like, from a purely archaeological perspective, with the Catholics, it's funny though, because like I went to St. Thomas Cathedral in India, where I looked down into where he's buried. But what's interesting with Catholic churches, you realize how much they just make up, like, this is where this happened. And then you find out like there's like a lot of contested accounts, but like just standing in buildings that are as old as they are and going like, okay, even if I don't agree with why this is here or what's happened here since, or what, it's like, this is an interesting pinpoint on the map of like, okay, something mattered to somebody here and why. That you just don't get in a warehouse full of people in skinny jeans playing music, or a fundamentalist church where it's like, go back to the old paths of Billy Sunday not that long ago. It's just a different perspective. But Catholics have a lot of bad abuse, though. I'm going to say that just as a disclaimer. I would not encourage anyone to go join your local Catholic church or to leave your children unattended within the Catholic Church. I'm just going to put a little disclaimer there.
Yeah. Very real.
Good art, though. Really good
art.
Great.
Got a racket on some of that stuff, man. Regarding the Cathedral of St. Thomas, this is one of my favorite things that most Christians don't know about. A lot of Christians have heard the story, the legend that the Apostle Thomas, after saying, "My Lord, my God," was sent to India to preach the gospel. Do you know where that story comes from?
I don't.
Do you know the history of this? That comes from a 3rd or 4th century document called the Acts of Thomas, and it's totally Gnostic. But the story is that Jesus sells Thomas into slavery to go and work in the palace of King Gungafora. I think I'm saying his name right.
Nobody will know if you're not, so just say it with confidence.
Right. But
that's not how you say it.
But it's the most like outlandish, wild story, and it's funny because apologists will sometimes point to like the martyrdom of the disciples as a proof for the resurrection. And it's like, man, you really don't want to go down that line of argumentation, because you have to rely on Gnostic sources to do it.
Right.
To say that any of the, not any, but that the majority of the disciples were martyred, a lot of those come from, sketchy texts.
Well, it's like the people that go, not to rabbit trail, but as somebody I knew shared a post the other day, and it was like, I think it was maybe a Charlie Kirk video. It was something, or no, it was Bryce, or whoever that one kid is that's really rising in the Christian realm, has the fluffy hair and talks about apologetics. I think his name's Bryce. But anyway, he says a lot of things with confidence very quickly. And someone's like, why do you believe? He's like, because 500 people saw the risen Savior, blah, 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 and like fires off all this stuff. And I started typing out, responding to their story, like, 500 people saw him, or one person wrote that 500 people saw him, because there's a big difference there. And then I deleted it because I didn't want to deal with it. But I was like, there's a lot of things like that just the slam dunk isn't as slam dunky as people would say. Anyway, all that saved for future conversation. I want to ask about two things here. Well, let me ask this first, and then just because I want to get it out of the way. With all of this, like I've talked about, like which one would you attend, which obviously comes down to preference of style, really. Like what kind of music can I deal with? What kind of art would I like to look at? When it comes to just theism in general, is there a certain apologetic, or maybe a specific teaching or argument from a particular sect of religion that honestly like does break your atheist brain, where you're like, I don't like this, actually really does make me question things. Like, do you have something like that? Or you're like, or this is really compelling and I could, like, I don't know how to even address that. Like that could, there's a seed there that's really interesting.
So I'll say two things. Probably the last straw that broke the camel's back for me, the last bulwark of my faith, was the, argument from morality, right? The moral argument for the existence of God. And, now as an atheist, I still agree with the structure of that argument. I just reject the conclusion. And so that's why I'm a nihilist. I think that's, and that'll also be eventually one of the things that atheists crucify me for, is being a nihilist in an atheist space where that's not the default, and I can respect that.
I like that you just lob the "I'm a nihilist" thing, and we'll just leave that there, and people go, what? But I don't really know how to talk about it more than that. I reject objective morality and reject good and evil and all that jazz. But I am only laughing because like I don't know what I would call myself, but I kicked around like 3 years ago. 2 years ago, I was talking to a friend, and I said, I think I'm like an optimistic nihilist. I don't know if that's a real thing, but I just said, but the last pillar for me was also objective. I think the strongest apologetic comes from morality. I still think that's where Christian apologists, to give them more ideas, that should be where they anchor their arguments, because I think that's a lot more like, it's a big unanswered question that I think they can offer a structured, logical argument for, but I also reject that claim. And it wasn't until reading Dr. Brian Klaus's book, where he talks about the evolutionary development of morality, that I was like, okay, there is another answer for this. That's not just like, no, that's dumb. But anyway, sorry, I don't want to.
Well, so two things with the moral argument. It's not necessarily to give an account for how morality came to be. The proper argument is to give an account for why it has weight. And so the correct response within the moral argument within theology is to ground it within the nature of God. So I think the argument kind of holds, TBH. But I think that unfortunately it's just not true, and so ergo I'm a nihilist. But Yeah, that's kind of neither here nor there. It's just a fun tidbit.
Yeah, I was just curious.
The,
I
the
think
thing, sorry, the thing that sucks about encouraging apologists to go down that rabbit hole is that the moral argument is probably one of the most emotionally charged apologetics that Christians can get into, because then you know Christians have to argue like, hey, atheist, you're being inconsistent if you're not a nihilist. And then I'd look at them and say, well, that's why I'm a nihilist. But I don't like the idea of a swarm of Christians telling a swarm of atheists, hey, your morality has no objective basis. It's like, that feels kind of icky. Just not because it's like philosophically icky, but just like that's going to be really bad for the discussion.
Yeah.
So,
right. Well, and ultimately we're all doing the same thing, is that there, argue that you do or don't, none of us fully know what happens when we die.
Sure.
It's what you do with the time that you're here. And I think whether you're saying that, like, that's kind of a nihilistic approach to life, is like, we're going to be gone. Like, so it's what happens now. If you're a fundamentalist, it's like, to me, the biggest issue I have with like the sect that I grew up in is like, so much was punted to once I die, like, where you can neglect the planet, your personal well-being, the well-being of others, because it will all be made right in the end. And so we're not going to do. That's why I kind of love post millennials, because it's like, or at least the logic of it, not people like Doug Wilson and like kind of the post millennial crowd. But it's like the idea of like, let's bring God's kingdom here and serve the orphan and widow. Like, hell yeah. Like, follow that theology a lot more than we're going to run this thing till it burns to the ground and then we get a kingdom. That to me is a lot more toxic and has worse ramifications.
Yeah.
Jehovah's Witnesses, you want to throw any more punches over there?
The amount of psychological damage that group has inflicted on people is unspeakable. And I've never really talked much about like their apocalyptic side. But I'm sure that I will eventually. It might take me a year or two to like really get to it. Eschatology has just never been my thing. But I do remember being in the Netherlands when I was in. I don't talk about it a whole lot, but I was in a cult for a little while. I was there for a few months in Rotterdam.
What stage of your life?
It would have been when I was 20 and 21.
Okay.
So I was doing an internship there, and only after I got there, I realized like, oh, this is a fringe sect. And I'm kind of increasingly reluctant to call it a cult. Just because like now I've been, more, associated with the Jehovah's Witnesses, and I know how deep and awful and terrible this can go. And so it feels almost like belittling to claim that my stupid little sect in the Netherlands was a cult by comparison. But it was a moderately high control group. And during that time, we had a little bit of an apocalyptic scare. This would have been outside of your orbit, but there was this. I really don't know how to not call him a grifter. Like I want to be gracious, but I'm still bitter. His name was Jonathan Kahn, and Kahn is literally in his name. Womp womp.
I just immediately thought Star Trek. I didn't even go there. Kahn!
Well, so this guy like had a book. I think it was his book about like the 4 blood moons, and how like, I don't think that he was predicting the end per se, but he was predicting, one of the first great rumblings of the end. And so he was imagining that like in the fall of 2015, there was going to be some great economic collapse. And he was gently urging people to like pull money out of their retirement accounts. And
he did a lot with Jim Baker and that and Time Z. Yeah. I'm obsessed with Jim Baker.
I went to seminary with some people who like worked on his program, weirdly enough. Very bizarre. But yeah, so like, this guy was imploring people to take money out of their Roth IRAs, their 401ks, and my parents got caught up in that.
Mm.
And my mom almost pulled out. I mean, she would have lost tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars had she had done that.
Mm.
And then nothing happens. And then, he's because of how he framed it was like, well, we don't know for sure, but we're trusting in God, and we're, the prophets are, have inklings from the Lord, and sometimes those can be wrong, but better safe than sorry. And
Enough
so
of a
nothing
hedging of that
happens.
bet. Yeah.
Yeah. Just hedge your bets and hedge yourself. And, hundreds or thousands of people made really stupid decisions, and there's no ramifications for it.
Yeah.
You just get to pivot. And life goes on for you, and you still have, millions of books sold, but it kills me. And so that, at the scale of the Jehovah's Witnesses, who have been told in perpetuity since like the 1920s, that they ought not to have children because they're not explicitly told that, but they're often, kind of like, well, do you really want to bring a child into something like this? They're told, don't go to college, because, well, the end's going to be around the corner any day now. And like, what are you going to do with an astrophysics degree when, the heavens are brought down to earth? And, it kills me.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you this as we kind of get near the end here. You said you're as famous as you want to be. Is there a next step here? Do you have any plans to expand what you're doing? Do you have a certain route you want to take? Is there a certain group you want to go into next? Like what's on the horizon for your channel and for you?
There are a few groups that I really want to investigate. True story. I'm probably going to need to start looking at like legal protection for some of these groups, because they, have a bad habit of being litigious. Yeah. So if you're a lawyer who wants to represent me pro bono, hit me up. Nothing's like, I'm not being sued currently, but maybe eventually, who knows?
Someone listening just heard an opportunity.
Oh God. So there's that. There are, several new cults and denominations, and not all of them are big, scary cults. Some of them are just like, very chill religious communities that I want to like explore and investigate because I'm curious. Yeah. I hope to eventually branch out a little bit more past the Abrahamic faiths, though very, very tenuously, because I don't know shit about any of the Eastern religions. And like, I'm already a bumbling idiot when it comes to the faiths that I have, 2 degrees in. Trying to figure out like the basics of Hinduism or Buddhism or Shintoism scares me endlessly. But maybe
so
that'll
much
be
is tied to culture, where like if you take a wrong step, you're stepping on not just a doctrine but also a way of life, and like in a way that's so different than I think evangelical Christianity. It's like when race, like there's racism you have to worry about stepping into that ties into, like, it's a very it scares me for that same reason. I'm like, how much of this is like it's so intertwined, like how do you go to India and talk about Hinduism? When you look around, it's like that is literally in the veins of everything you're looking at in every direction,
So there's all that coming up later this year. I have my first international trip. Actually my first couple of international trips. I'm wildly excited about it. Can't talk about it yet. But those are kind of on the horizon. Let's see what else. Yeah. And I think that with a lot of what I do, I'm trying to learn more and explore more on some of these like theological systems. It's really interesting for me to just go and visit like the average Methodist church down the street. And I think that's really healthy for people to see that, hey, not every church is a cult. Not every religion is a high control movement. So I kind of keep it in the back of my mind. It's like, okay, I don't want to spend, 3 months in a row just talking about the United House of Prayer for All People and the Jehovah's Witnesses and all, the Moonies and whoever else. I do need to pepper in some like Joe Schmo church down the street just to kind of give people that refresher, like, hey, these are sometimes the exception to the rule, or maybe not the exception to the rule, but like these are the ones that stand out as anomalies. But still, your average church is filled with average people, and that needs to be kept in mind. So there's that. But yeah, there are some very wacky religious communities that I want to dig deeper into, and even some of the ones that I've covered already: the Jehovah's Witnesses, the Christian Scientists, the Mormons. I want to dig deeper because those are very deep rabbit trails, and I want to understand those people better.
Yeah. Well, love it. Well, I'll be watching whatever you do next. I'd love to see you dip your toe into the IFB. I'm biased there. I'd love to see you dip into the new IFB with kind of the Steven Anderson type crowds. I'd love to see that stuff. But I'll be there for the ride. I'll watch you read the Book of Mormon. I will watch you talk shit on the Jehovah's Witness theology any day of the week. Thank you so much for doing this, for your work. And seriously, if you're listening to this episode and you're not watching that channel, like it's one of the best, most interesting channels in this niche that I could recommend. So be sure to check it out. If you have to choose between my show and that one, this one, but if you have room for one more, dive in. Thank you so much, Jared, for doing this. I hope it's not the last time, and really enjoyed the conversation.
100%, man. Thank you so much, Eric.